The first sign wasn't a message or a lie. It was how calm my wife became after yoga. Not relaxed, not pleasantly tired. Calm in a way that felt finished, like something heavy had already been set down somewhere else. She'd come home quieter, moving through the house as if nothing could reach her. Stress didn't spill into the room with her anymore. The sharp edges I'd grown used to over the years were suddenly sanded smooth, and instead of relief, I felt displaced. At first, I told myself this was good. Healing, progress. I'd encouraged her to go after all. She'd complained for months about tight shoulders, shallow breathing, a constant sense that she was carrying something she couldn't put down. Yoga sounded healthy, grounded, the kind of thing people do when they're trying to take care of themselves instead of slowly unraveling. She talked about the classes at the beginning, poses she couldn't quite hold yet, muscles she hadn't known existed, the studio's clean wood floors, the quiet music. She mentioned the instructor's cues, how he explained breath like it mattered, like it was a language. I listened and nodded, and felt relieved to hear her animated again. Then the tone shifted. She stopped talking about yoga like it was exercise and started talking about it like it was permission. She'd sit on the edge of the bed after class and stretch slowly, deliberately, eyes closed, as if she was still being watched. She'd move through the house with a softness that felt practiced, almost rehearsed, like she didn't want to disturb something delicate she was carrying back with her. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was projecting insecurity onto a good thing. I reminded myself that calm was what she'd been seeking, that I should be grateful she'd found it. But gratitude doesn't usually feel like being replaced. The schedule hardened next. Yoga stopped being something she did and became something everything else bent around. Dinners shifted, plans moved. If a class ran late, nothing else mattered. She began showering immediately when she got home. No lingering in the kitchen, no casual conversation. Just a quick smile and a closed bathroom door. Steam filling the hallway like a barrier. I started noticing details I'd never paid attention to before. The way she'd roll her shoulders absent-mindedly while checking her phone. The way she corrected my posture jokingly, repeating phrases I knew she hadn't learned from me. Soften your jaw, she'd say, smiling. Engage your core. It should have been nothing. It should have been charming. Instead, it felt like I was listening to a private language I didn't speak. One night, she came home later than usual. Not dramatically late, just enough to register. I asked if everything was okay. She smiled and said yes, but it was the kind of smile people use to end a conversation, not answer a question. You seem lighter, I said. She paused, considering the word. Then she nodded. I feel understood. Understood. I didn't ask by whom. I didn't want to sound insecure. In hindsight, that was my mistake. Believing insecurity was worse than ignorance. The first crack came on a quiet evening I remember too clearly. I was folding laundry in the bedroom while she showered. Her phone was on the dresser, face up. I wasn't snooping. The screen lit on its own. You were very open today. That kind of trust matters. No last name, just a first initial I didn't recognize. The words weren't explicit. They weren't reckless. That was the problem. They were intimate in the way that bypasses alarms. Intimate like a hand on the small of your back when no one's looking. When she came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, she noticed my face immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked. I held up the phone. "Who's this?" She didn't panic. That was the part that chilled me. "Oh," she said, exhaling. "That's my instructor." Something in her tone suggested this should have been obvious. "Why is your yoga instructor texting you like that?" I asked. She hesitated, just long enough to choose an answer that would sound reasonable. "Because yoga isn't just physical," she said. "It's about connection." Connection. I nodded slowly, the way you do when you're trying to keep a conversation from tipping before you know how deep the water is. "That sounds personal," I said. She met my eyes. "You're overthinking it." Overthinking is what people say when they need you to doubt yourself. when clarity would be inconvenient. I didn't push that night. I slept beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe evenly like nothing had shifted. But something had. I could feel it. A subtle tilt, like gravity had recalibrated without telling me. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. Not obsessively, just enough to notice the pattern. Texts before class, texts after. Long pauses where she'd stare at the screen, then type slowly, deliberately. When I asked how yoga was, she spoke about it like it was sacred, like it required care to describe. "He really sees people," she said once. "He notices things others miss." I wondered when she decided I was no longer one of those people. The truth didn't arrive in a dramatic reveal. It accumulated. Small moments that refused to be explained away once you stacked them together. One afternoon, I came home early and found her sitting on the couch, phone pressed to her chest like she'd been interrupted mid-thought. She looked up too quickly, smiled too fast. "You okay?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "Just tired." But she wasn't tired. She was contained. That night, lying awake beside her, I understood something that frightened me more than anger ever could. This wasn't an affair born of impulse. This was intimacy built slowly, deliberately, under the cover of self-improvement and trust. A sacred space where questions were discouraged and boundaries blurred because everything sounded healthy. Yoga had given her vocabulary for surrender, for openness, for listening to her body instead of the noise around it. And somewhere in that quiet room, someone else had been listening too. I realized then that whatever was happening didn't need secrecy to survive. It needed credibility. It needed me to believe that calm was always good, that connection was always healing, that trust meant staying silent when something didn't sit right. I turned onto my side and watched her sleep, face peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. The sight should have comforted me. Instead, it made something in my chest go cold, because I understood, finally, what had changed. She hadn't pulled away from me. She'd found a place where she no longer needed me at all, and I had no idea how far that place already reached, or how much of our marriage had been quietly stretched around it to keep the shape intact. I didn't learn about our home becoming the place they used all at once. That truth arrived the way mold does, quietly, invisibly at first, spreading in places you don't inspect until the damage is already set. The first hint was the schedule. Her yoga classes multiplied without explanation. Not more classes on the calendar, more gaps around them, errands that didn't align, afternoons where she was suddenly free when she shouldn't have been. I work from home some days, and she knew exactly which ones I didn't. She'd always known my rhythms better than I did. That was the part that hurt later. The precision. One Thursday, she suggested I go into the office even though I didn't need to. She framed it as concern. "You've been restless," she said. "A change of scenery might help." It sounded caring. I went. When I came back early because a meeting canceled, the house felt wrong before I saw anything specific. Not messy, not altered, just arranged. The living room cushions were aligned more neatly than usual. The air smelled faintly of incense she rarely used. The windows were cracked open despite the cool weather. She wasn't home. I stood there, keys still in my hand, and felt a slow tightening in my chest. Not panic, but recognition. The kind you feel when your body understands something before your mind is ready to accept it. I checked the bedroom. The bed was made too carefully. Hospital corners, no wrinkles, no sign of rest. The bathroom towels had been changed, the trash emptied. It looked like preparation. When she came home later, she acted normal, asked about my day, kissed my cheek. There was no guilt in her movements, no hesitation. It was as if she believed the house itself would keep her secret. That night I slept lightly. The house made small sounds, pipes, settling wood, the quiet hum of electricity. Every noise felt amplified, like the walls were rehearsing something they hadn't yet told me. Over the next weeks, patterns formed. She'd ask me to step out for groceries she didn't need. She'd insist on deep cleaning days when I was away. She started locking the door behind me when I left, something she'd never done before. Once, I forgot my laptop and turned back 5 minutes after leaving. The car was still warm when I pulled into the driveway. The front door was locked. She answered quickly, breath even, smile already in place. "I thought you left," she said. "I did," I replied. "Forgot something." She stepped aside to let me in, but her body blocked the hallway just enough to guide me away from the bedroom. It was subtle. It was practiced. I retrieved my laptop and left again, my hands shaking only once I was back in the car. That was when the idea took shape. Not suspicion anymore, but structure. They weren't meeting randomly. They were using the house, our house, the space where we ate, slept, argued, reconciled, the place that still held photos of us smiling at milestones that now felt counterfeit. They'd turned it into a container, safe, controlled, familiar, sacred, in a way that made my stomach turn. The confirmation came on a Sunday afternoon. She told me she was going to a longer session at the studio, a private adjustment workshop. She said it lightly, like it was a gift she'd given herself. She asked if I could visit my brother across town. I almost laughed at the symmetry. I didn't go. I drove around the block instead and parked where I could see the front of our house. I sat there for nearly an hour, my chest tight, my mind rehearsing 1,000 ways this could be nothing. Then his car pulled up. I recognized it from the studio's lot. Clean, unremarkable, the kind of car you forget unless you need to remember it. He didn't hesitate. He walked up the driveway like he belonged there, like he'd done it before. He let himself in. I didn't move. I couldn't. I sat in the car and watched the door close behind him, the finality of it landing harder than any confrontation could have. They didn't rush. That detail will stay with me forever. He stayed for over 2 hours. When he left, he looked calm, grounded, the way people look after doing something they believe is aligned with who they are. He didn't glance around. He didn't check for witnesses. He didn't need to. I waited another 20 minutes before going home. She was in the kitchen when I walked in, chopping vegetables with measured movements. Music played softly. The house smelled clean again. "Hey," she said. "You're back early." I watched her hands. Steady, confident. "Yeah," I said. "Did yoga run long?" She smiled. "Very." I nodded and walked past her, every step feeling like I was crossing a line that no longer existed. I sat on the couch, the same couch where she'd laughed with friends, where we'd fallen asleep watching movies, where they had likely sat together, close enough to share breath. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake cataloging the rooms in my head, imagining where they'd stood, what they'd touched. Not graphically, spatially, logistically, like an audit of violation. It wasn't a one-time thing. That much was clear. They'd chosen my absence, chosen my routines, chosen my trust. And the worst part, the part that hollowed me out completely, was realizing she'd come back to me afterward every time. Calm, open, balanced. The yoga wasn't just teaching her how to breathe, it was teaching her how to compartmentalize. Over the next days, I found quiet confirmations everywhere. Extra towels washed midweek. Sheets changed when they didn't need to be. A candle moved from the shelf to the coffee table, then back again. Evidence without fingerprints. She didn't confess. I didn't accuse. We moved through the house together like actors hitting marks we no longer believed in. Until one evening, as she was locking the door behind me again, she said softly, "Text me when you're almost back." "For dinner?" I asked. She hesitated. "Just so I know." That was when I understood how often she needed to know, how often my absence was required. I walked out, got in the car, and drove with one thought looping steadily in my mind. They hadn't just crossed a boundary. They had rehearsed it, repeated it, normalized it, until my home became the safest place in the world for them to betray me. And I was the only one who hadn't been invited to that understanding. I didn't confront her right away, even after I watched him let himself into our house. Not because I was scared of the truth, but because I'd learned something important about the way this was happening. It survived on calm. It survived on the idea that everything was healthy, grounded, adult. If I exploded, I would become the problem. The unstable husband, the man who couldn't handle his wife finding herself. And she would cling to that narrative because it was cleaner than admitting what she'd done in the rooms we both paid for. So I did what I'd never wanted to do. I collected reality. The next morning, while she was out, another class, another workshop, I opened the app for our smart lock. We'd installed it years ago, mostly for convenience. Codes for family, temporary access for dog sitters, a log that quietly recorded who came and went. I'd never looked at it like evidence before. There it was. Entries on days I'd been at work. Entries on days she'd told me she'd been running errands. Entries that lined up with the moments my gut had clenched for no reason. The lock didn't care about explanations. It didn't argue. It simply recorded. A guest code had been created 2 months ago. Not mine. The code name read, Instructor. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. My wife hadn't just invited him in. She'd formalized it, built it into our home system like it belonged there, like he was a service, like this was maintenance. I sat on the edge of the couch and tried to breathe evenly, the way she'd been learning to. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, controlled. But calm felt different in my body now. It felt like something I was forcing, not something I was receiving. When she came home that afternoon, she was glowing in a quiet way that used to make me smile. She kissed my cheek and said, "You seem tense." I almost laughed. "I'm fine," I said, because I needed one more thing before I spoke. I needed to understand the shape of the lie. That evening, I did something that felt humiliating and necessary. I went to the yoga studio, not to storm in, not to accuse, just to sit in the parking lot and watch the door. The building looked harmless, warm light in the windows. A little sign in cursive, people carrying mats like they were bringing offerings. It smelled faintly of incense, even from outside, like the air itself was trying to soothe you. I watched my wife walk in with her water bottle and her practiced calm. I watched her greet people, smile, blend in. She looked like someone doing something good for herself. That's the cruelty of it. Betrayal doesn't always look like darkness. Sometimes it looks like wellness. I waited 15 minutes before going inside. At the front desk, a young woman with a bright smile asked if I was there for a class. I told her no. I told her my wife came here and I wanted to buy her a gift card. Something supportive. Something a good husband would do. The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but it worked. The receptionist's face softened. "That's sweet. What's her name?" I told her. She typed, nodded, and said, "Oh, she's in a private session." Private. The word landed hard. "With?" I kept my voice light, like I was just making conversation. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then smiled again. "With Julian." Julian, not instructor, not coach. A name, familiar, human. "Is he the owner?" I asked. "No, but he's popular," she said, choosing the word carefully, as if she'd learned which words were safest in that place. "People feel very comfortable with him." Comfortable. I thanked her and left before my face could betray me. Back in my car, I sat with the steering wheel under my palms and felt a cold clarity settle in. This wasn't a misunderstanding between two adults who connected. This was a pattern that had infrastructure. I went home and waited. When my wife returned, she was quieter than usual. Not guilty, guarded, like she'd sensed the air shift. "How was it?" I asked. She shrugged. "Good." "Just good?" She looked at me then, eyes narrowing slightly. "Why are you asking like that?" I forced my voice to stay even. "Because you seem changed lately." She exhaled slowly, like she was centering herself. "Yoga helps me regulate, that's all." Regulate. That word did something to me, because it sounded clinical. strategic, like she was managing her nervous system the way she was managing our marriage, keeping it stable enough on the surface that no one questioned what was underneath. Later that night, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Sophie, an old coworker of mine. We weren't close, but we'd stayed politely connected online. She'd posted about yoga sometimes, about the same studio. Her message was short. Hey, random, but does your wife go to that studio on River? I saw her coming out with Julian once. I didn't say hi. Felt awkward. I stared at the screen, my pulse picking up again. I wrote back, "Did you notice anything else?" There was a long pause. Then, "I'm not trying to stir anything, but he has a reputation. Some women get very attached. I've seen it turn messy." Messy? I asked Sophie if she'd meet me for coffee. She agreed. The next afternoon, sitting across from her in a quiet cafe, I felt the cost of what I was doing. I was bringing my private life into the open. I was asking someone outside my marriage to confirm what my wife had refused to acknowledge. Sophie looked uncomfortable before she even spoke. "I don't want to be cruel," she said, "but I've heard things." "From who?" "Other students," she admitted. "People joke about private sessions, the way he talks, the way he texts." My stomach tightened. "Texts?" Sophie nodded slowly. "He frames it like emotional coaching, like he's helping them be open, but it crosses lines." I didn't ask her to accuse him of anything worse than what I already knew. I didn't need scandal. I needed confirmation that my instincts weren't paranoia. Sophie hesitated, then slid her phone across the table. "This was sent in a group chat I was in months ago. I left after." On the screen was a screenshot of a message from a woman I didn't know. "He came to my place after class. Said it's better in a safe environment. Just be careful if you're married." Married? I felt my throat tighten. Because that meant he knew. It meant he wasn't confused about boundaries. It meant the calm was curated to make people stop questioning what they were consenting to. When I got home, my wife was stretching in the living room. Music low, eyes closed. She looked peaceful. I stood there and watched her for a long moment, realizing this was the last time I'd see her like that without the truth sitting between us. I went to my desk, opened the smart lock log again, and printed it. Dates, times, the guest code name, all of it. I laid the pages neatly in a folder like I was preparing for a meeting. Not a fight, a moment. That night she came into the guest room doorway, hesitant. "Are you sleeping in here again?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said. "Why?" she whispered, as if she still believed this was something she could talk her way around. I looked up at her and felt my voice steady itself into something unfamiliar. "Because I know he's been here," I said, "and I know it wasn't once." Her face went pale so fast it was almost involuntary. For the first time since this began, she didn't tell me I was overthinking. She didn't say yoga was about connection. She didn't reach for calm. She just stood there, lips parted, caught between denial and the reality that my silence had ended. And in that moment, I realized the next step wasn't about catching her. It was about choosing whether I would let her keep turning my home into a place where the truth was optional. I opened the folder and set it on the bed between us. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, "we're going to talk. And this time, you're not going to breathe your way out of it." Her eyes filled, but she didn't move. Because she finally understood what I did. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was the end of the system. I didn't decide to take revenge in a burst of anger. That would have been easier to explain, to myself, to anyone who asked. Rage gives you excuses. It lets you pretend you lost control. What I felt instead was clarity. The night I laid the folder on the bed between us, my wife didn't touch it. She stared at the pages like they might move on their own. Like the truth could rearrange itself if she didn't acknowledge it directly. The room was quiet in a way that felt permanent. "I can explain," she said finally. I shook my head. "Not tonight." That surprised her. She'd prepared for tears, for arguments, for me to demand answers she could reshape. She wasn't prepared for restraint. I slept in the guest room again, but I didn't sleep much. I lay awake mapping out what had already happened, what could still happen, and what I refused to let happen next. I understood something important in those hours. Revenge didn't have to be loud to be devastating. It just had to be precise. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years, not because I was falling apart, but because I needed time to act without interruption. I started with documentation, not screenshots sent in anger, not accusations. I organized everything the way I'd learned to organize my life: timelines, logs, confirmations, the smart lock entries, the studio schedule, the messages Sophie had shown me, dates that overlapped too cleanly to deny, patterns that told a story without commentary. I wasn't building a case to punish her emotionally. I was building leverage. Then I made 3 appointments: a lawyer, a therapist, and, quietly, the yoga studio's owner. The lawyer came first. I didn't dramatize anything. I laid out the facts and asked one question: how do I protect myself? She listened carefully, flipping through pages, nodding slowly. "You've already done the most important thing," she said. "You stopped reacting." The therapist came next. That surprised even me. Not because I wanted help processing my feelings, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't lying to myself about what I was about to do. I needed a neutral mirror. Someone who would tell me if I was becoming someone I wouldn't recognize later. "You're not seeking revenge," she said, after listening quietly. "You're seeking restoration of reality." That distinction mattered. The meeting with the studio owner was last. I didn't accuse Julian directly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I asked questions about policies, about boundaries, about private sessions conducted outside the studio. I asked what the protocol was if an instructor entered a student's home. The owner's expression changed in small increments. Not shock, recognition. "I'm not making a complaint," I said calmly. "I'm giving you information." I slid the folder across the desk. She didn't promise anything. She didn't need to. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the risk assessment, the liability, the way reputations collapse quietly before anyone announces it. When I got home, my wife was waiting in the kitchen. "You went somewhere," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied. "Where?" "I'll tell you when it matters." She stared at me like she was trying to recognize a version of me she hadn't planned for. That evening, I told her I wanted separation. Not a trial period, not space, separation. She cried then, not theatrically, not manipulatively, just raw, frightened tears. "Are you doing this to punish me?" she asked. "No," I said honestly. "I'm doing this to stop participating." That answer didn't satisfy her. It wasn't dramatic enough. It didn't give her a villain to push against. Over the next weeks, I moved with intention. I told my family, not with details, but with enough truth that the narrative didn't get rewritten later. I told close friends before rumors could do it for me. I didn't smear her. I didn't exaggerate. I told the story plainly and let the silence afterwards speak for itself. Then I did something she never expected. I stopped talking about Julian entirely. No confrontations, no warnings, no messages, because the kind of revenge I'd chosen didn't require my presence. It unfolded on its own. Julian was suspended pending review. Quietly. His classes were reassigned. His private sessions were paused. Students started asking questions the studio couldn't ignore anymore. People talk when routines change. My wife noticed first. "He's been distant," she said one night during a tense exchange over logistics. "Something's wrong." I said nothing. Weeks later, the suspension became termination. No public announcement. Just absence. The same kind she'd practiced so carefully. When she realized what had happened, she accused me of ruining his life. I looked at her calmly. I didn't touch his life. I just removed the cover. That was when she understood. Not the details, but the shift in power. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I hadn't tried to win her back or destroy her outright. I'd let the truth move through systems that didn't need my emotion to function. The house sold faster than expected. We divided what we needed to divide. The process was cleaner than the marriage had been in its final months. The last time we spoke in person, she asked me a question that told me everything about how she'd misjudged me. "Do you feel better now?" she asked. "After what you did?" I thought about it. "I feel finished," I said. That was the revenge. Not pain, not humiliation, finality. I hadn't tried to teach her a lesson. I'd simply refused to keep absorbing the cost of her calm. And once I stepped out of the role she'd assigned me, the quiet husband, the stable container, the entire structure she'd built lost its balance. Because systems like that don't collapse from attack. They collapse when the person holding them up stops pretending they're fine. Everyone expected the ending to be about winning, about watching her regret it, about seeing the yoga teacher lose everything, about me standing taller because the truth had finally been dragged into the light. That's how stories like this are usually told. Damage answered with damage, betrayal balanced by consequences. That's not how it ended. After the separation papers were signed and the house was sold, my life became quieter than it had been in years. Not lonely, quiet. No tension humming under the floorboards, no careful scheduling, no incense trying to cover the smell of something rotten underneath. Just empty rooms and time that belonged only to me. At first, I didn't know what to do with that silence. I woke up early out of habit, reached for a phone that no longer needed checking, and sat with my coffee longer than necessary. I noticed things I'd forgotten to notice. How light moved through windows, how my shoulders felt when they weren't braced, how breathing was supposed to feel when it wasn't managed for performance. That's when something unexpected happened. I missed her. Not the woman she'd become at the end. Not the one who locked doors behind me and curated calm while my life fractured quietly. I missed the earlier version. The one who laughed loudly, who cried easily, who used to sprawl across the couch and talk too much about nothing. I hated myself for that. So I brought it up in therapy, expecting to be told it was weakness or nostalgia or trauma bonding. Instead, my therapist nodded gently and said, "You're grieving the version of your life that felt safe. That doesn't mean you want it back." That distinction changed everything. A few weeks later, I ran into her by accident. Not at a dramatic location, not somewhere symbolic. A grocery store late in the evening, both of us reaching for the same loaf of bread like we hadn't coordinated our lives around avoidance for months. She froze when she saw me. I didn't. We stood there awkwardly, two people who knew each other's bodies better than anyone else once, now strangers negotiating eye contact. "You look different," she said finally. "So do you," I replied. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't praise, just an observation. We moved to opposite ends of the aisle, then stopped again, as if something unfinished had tugged us back into the same space. "I heard about the studio," she said quietly. I nodded. "I heard you moved." "Yes," she hesitated. "Smaller place." "I like small," I said, surprising myself. She smiled faintly, not the practiced calm. Something raw, sadder. "I didn't know how much I was hiding from myself," she said. "I thought calm meant healed." I looked at her for a long moment and realized something that softened the last hard edge inside me. She wasn't free now. She was awake. "I hope you find what you're actually looking for," I said. She swallowed. "I think I already lost it." We stood there, surrounded by ordinary life continuing without us, and for the first time since everything broke, I felt compassion without obligation. We said goodbye without promises. I walked out of the store lighter than I'd walked in. The most unexpected part came later, months later. I signed up for a yoga class. Not at her old studio. Not even in the same part of town. A small community center, cheap mats, no incense. The instructor was an older man with bad knees who cracked jokes about flexibility being optional. I almost laughed out loud at the irony. But something about it felt right. On the mat, Following awkward poses, I noticed how tense I'd been for years without realizing it, how my body had learned to brace for emotional weather before my mind caught up. I breathed, not the way I'd been taught to, but the way my body needed to. No witnesses, no performance, just presence. After class, I didn't feel enlightened or transformed. I felt honest. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I understood the real ending of this story. Revenge hadn't healed me. Exposure hadn't either. Even justice, in its quiet way, hadn't been the point. What saved me was reclaiming the parts of myself I'd outsourced to the marriage. The calm, the grounding, the permission to take up space without managing someone else's narrative. The yoga teacher lost his position. My wife lost her marriage. Those facts mattered, but they weren't the ending. The ending was this. I stopped measuring my worth by how well I could contain someone else's chaos. I learned that peace borrowed from the wrong place always comes with a bill. And the calm she brought home every night, so practiced, so convincing, was never something she took from me. It was something she didn't know how to build on her own. I don't hate her. I don't miss her the way I once did. What I feel now is something quieter and stronger than either of those things. Gratitude. Because losing her taught me how much of myself I'd been giving away just to keep things stable. And finding myself again, without witnesses, without performance, without needing silence to survive, was the most unexpected ending of all.